Hi, this is Miss Safi. Thank you so much for joining me for this lesson on verbs. Let me just get my pen up. All right, so this will be an essential element of the English language, verbs that is, and it's really important that we go over it. So in this presentation, I'm going to go over the 5 parts of a sentence, just as a review. What is a verb? Verb tenses, verb spelling patterns, at least some of them, and then we'll apply our knowledge with some practice. So there are 5 basic parts that are required for a complete sentence, so you'll make sure that you know these, please. And not just know them, but actually apply them to your writing at all times. So these 5 basic parts equal a complete sentence. So you have to start with the capitalization. Your sentence also needs to end with punctuation, and it needs to make sense. And then in between we have verbs and subjects. So if your sentence has all 5 of these components, you have a complete sentence. And the verb is also known as the predicate part of the sentence, and the subject is also known as the sentence. Alright, so remember that a complete sentence has a subject and a predicate that work together to make a complete thought that makes sense. So Bobby smiled until he thought his face would crack. So who or what is the action? I'm sorry, not who or what. What is the action in this sentence? It's smiled. Okay, that's our action. That's what's physically being done. Then we can narrow this down to find our subject by asking who or what smiled until he thought his face would crack. The answer to that question is Bobby, so we have narrowed it down to our subject. And then this particular sentence makes sense. It starts with a capital letter and it has punctuation, so we have a complete sentence. So the part of this formula that we're going to be focusing on today is number 2, the predicate or the verb. So what is a verb? Basically, a verb is a word that describes the action in a sentence. It's the doing part of the sentence. So here are some examples. I play football. It's a physical action to play something. They skip quickly. Again, skipping is a physical action. We eat spaghetti. Again, eating is something that you can physically do. Bob is 7 today. Now the little trick one in this particular set of sentences is this last one, because is not something that you physically do. However, in this sentence, that is the only verb. So is actually our verb in this sentence, and it has a special name. It's called the state of being verb. And state of being verbs basically just tell you the condition of the subject. So in this case, Bob is the subject and his condition is that he's 7 today. So it's a connector between Bob and this condition, and that's why it's called a state of being verb. So 3 main types of verbs to keep in mind are the physical ones, such as jump and run. Some of us break this down even further into mental verbs like think and love. And then we have the state of being verbs such as is or are, and there's other ones too, but those are just 2 of the examples I'm giving you right now. So can you spot the words which are verbs? You want to look for anything that you can physically do. Okay. So hopefully you picked jump. How about sit? Cup and sun are nouns. These aren't going to work. Pig is also a noun. Now, one thing to keep in mind is there is a way to check if a word is a verb. Basically, just see if you can change it. If you can change it, then you probably have a verb on your hands. So, like jump. Jump can become jumped or jumping. So, those are verbs. Sit can be sitting or sat. So when we make those changes, what we're referring to is verb tenses. Verb tenses describe when the action is happening. So So the following sentences are written in the present tense. I want you to try changing them to the past tense by putting the word yesterday at the beginning of each sentence. So this first one says, I walked to school. So change this to past tense by saying yesterday is it going to be walked to school or walked to school? And hopefully you've answered that yesterday I walked to school. Go ahead and try this one, and this one. So think about how have the verbs changed in all of these examples. Which word in each sentence actually does the change? Let's look at it. So hopefully you got all these correct. And what I really want you to notice is how you have ed ending off each of these words. This is the simplest way to identify a verb. So this works for regular verbs when we take the physical action, which in this case is walk, and we add ed to it to make this a past tense verb. Simple formula. Now, is there a spelling pattern connecting the changes to these verbs? It really is just the main verb plus e at the end of each of them. So here you go again. You can see that. So it's just walk, jump, look, and play. It's the main verb. And then all you do is add ed at the end of every one of them. That's it for regular verbs. Okay. All right, let's look for a pattern in this one. Put these sentences into the past. Think how the verbs will alter this time. So remember your little trick. Try to put the word yesterday in front of the sentence to alter it to the past. Go ahead and pause the screen for as long as you need to work on these sentences, and then unpause when you're ready to look at the answers with me. So how did you do? I'm hoping that you got the same thing that I have up here, where it becomes she hopped over the cracks to make it past tense. And I'm hoping also that you're noticing something specific about the verbs up here on the screen right now. Notice how sorry about that. Here are your sample sentences. I want you to go ahead and pause the screen and take some time to rewrite the verbs in the past tense form and try to get the spelling correct. And when you're ready, move on to the next screen with me to look at the answers. So hopefully you got this, where the Y changes to an I basically. So in this first sentence where it says I tried to make all my letters join, if you look here, there's the verb, but then when we want to put it in the past tense, we actually have to change the Y to an I and add ed. Okay, so drop the Y, add the I, and then add ed. Okay. Same thing for cry. Cry becomes cried, fry becomes fried, and carry becomes carried. In all these instances, Y is dropped, I is added, and then ed is added. All right, let's look at some of the rules that we've practiced. In this first set of words, we take the Y and we change it to an I, and then we add ed. In the second set of words, we basically just add ed. And in the last set of words, we doubled the final consonant and then added ed. So those are some of the spelling rules that we looked at today. All right, let's just do a quick recap of these verbs. So I want you to try to write the past tense version of each of these verbs, and if it helps you out, put it in a sentence where you're talking about putting that verb in the past. So like yesterday, and then whatever sentence you come up with this verb in it. So go ahead and pause the screen, take as long as you need to do this, and when you're ready, unpause so we can look at the answers together. Remember to use word yesterday at the start of the sentences to help you out. Okay. Okay, so go ahead and pause the screen, take as long as you need to put these verbs in the past, and then unpause it and join me so we can look at the answers. How did you do? Did you figure that Jack and Jill went up the hill? Thomas found the mouse. Lucy did her homework. Bo Peep sat on her sheep. Okay. Irregular verbs can be tricky to learn. You might hear people at school using the add ed rule to irregular verbs, and it's not always correct. It's not always possible. Sometimes you just have to learn what the list of irregular verbs are in English. All right, here's another example. And this is really an example of what happens when we don't follow verb rules in English. So I'm just going to try to read the first couple sentences for you, and you'll get a taste of what it's like. Last weekend I goed to my friend's house. First I runned up to the door and ringed the bell. No answer. I writed a note and readed it back to myself. I'm not even going to go on. Hopefully you realize how odd that sounds and that we do not speak that way. So understanding verbs is really important to making sure that we are speaking and writing proper standard English. Though irregular verbs do not follow the plus ed pattern of regular verbs, there are some patterns to discover with irregular verbs. Can you spot any here? What has happened to the words ending in OW? What happened to these words over here? Notice that everything stayed the same except that middle vowel changed. So blow became blue, grow became grew, and throw became threw. So there is some pattern to it. What about the words with the double E? What do you notice? What happens to these words? So the double E's actually get one E dropped. So meet becomes met and feed becomes fed. All right, let's try it out. Here's a couple of sentences for you to proofread. So read through these sentences. Can you spot a problem? Go ahead and pause the screen and take as long as you need to figure out where the verb error is in these sentences, and then unpause and follow along with me to look at the answers. How did you do? Did you figure that last year I ate school lunches and went to after school club would be how to correct the sentence? And then the other one should be went. This part should have changed, okay? So good job, guys. Let's recap. You went over the 5 parts of a sentence with me. You went over what is a verb, verb tenses, verb spelling patterns, and we did some practice. So thanks again for joining me. If you have any questions at all, please do reach out, and I would definitely love to hear from you. Thanks so much.